Hello everyone, my name's Steven, and the story I chose to review is Blood Beer Making. The reason I chose this story is because the title just really drew my attention and made me curious to know what happened. So before I go into the review, I'm going to give a quick synopsis of the story. Joel and Teddy were best friends since they were kids. They had a tough time growing up, both came from single parent homes, and as a result they were very close. Growing up, they were pretty good kids. They got in occasional trouble here and there, but they were pretty good. When they were teens, Joel, because he looked so much older, he was able to get alcohol easily, and the two would go down by the riverbed. They would skip rocks, talk about girls, and drink. And this was, just innocent kid stuff. But soon, the drinking became worse as the years went by. Neither boy went to college, and they both ended up getting menial jobs here and there as pizza delivery boys, gas station clerks, stuff like that. And over the time, Joe's drinking got worse, and six-pack wouldn't do it anymore. He upgraded to the hard liquor. Teddy realized that his friend was slipping into alcoholism and tried to talk him down and get him to slow down and stop. But Joel wouldn't have it, and the two slowly drifted apart. Joel eventually got a steady job as a janitor, and because he was working the night shift, he would come to work drunk, but he justified saying as long as he got the job done, it didn't really matter. Soon, however, he was arrested for a DUI. It was his first offense, so he was let off with just a fine and a restricted license. Joel cut back on the drinking and only resorted to drinking when he was off. But once the 6 months were up and his license was restored, he was once again arrested for a DUI. This time, Joel wasn't so lucky. He had to do 90 days in jail. When he got out, he had no job, no place to go. But luckily, the local priest was there to help. He gave him a room in the basement in exchange for some handyman work around the church. Joel slowly got his act together. Joel went through a lot of hardships, but he was finally sober. And although Joel was struggling with life, Teddy was not. He was the complete opposite. During this time, he had met a woman, they got married, he moved away, and they even had kids together. Soon, Joel got word that Teddy would be coming back for the 15-year high school reunion. Joel was excited to see his friend again, who he hadn't seen in 6 years. At the reunion, the two hung out again. It was like old times. They were drinking, having fun. That night, Teddy had gotten drunker than normal. He usually never drank, and he never drank to get drunk anymore. But he got drunk that night, and Joel offered to drive Teddy's rental car back to his hotel. That night, it was raining, and Joel was not used to driving a hybrid because he couldn't hear the engine noises. He didn't realize how fast he was going. And when he came up on a turn, he didn't turn enough, and they slid off the road. The passenger side door of the car slammed against a tree, and Teddy died that night. Joel was arrested for drunk driving and the homicide of his friend. Now, when it came time to charge, because Joel had no money, he got a public defender. This public defender was keen on moving up in the ranks and was really ambitious and tried to get Joel off. He had his assistant look into ways that a blood alcohol test could be proven wrong, and they came up with in vitro fermentation. The assistant told Joel's public defender that he had found a case in the literature where a diabetic patient with a yeast infection in his bladder produced ethanol as a byproduct of fermentation. She explained that it's the same process that is used to make beer. You need an enzyme that's supplied by the yeast, then you need a substrate, that's the blood sugar, and you need an oxygen source, that's in the air. Then voila, alcohol. The public defender was ecstatic because now he was going to try to use this to explain away Joel's drunkenness that night. The public defender paid a so-called expert witness to substantiate that this could in fact happen, and this could be the reason why Joel's blood test came back saying that he was drunk that night. However, the prosecutor had their own expert witness. The author of the book, Alan Wu, testified that that process could not in fact explain away the blood alcohol test, because he claimed that he had evidence from the medical record that Joel's blood was positive from ethanol at the time of his admission into the hospital. The public defender asked him how was this new information that the DA had not disclosed. Why did it not get disclosed? And Wu simply, because no one asked me. This is not new information. No one had asked me about it previously. I never had the opportunity to explain it until now. at which point Wu went on to state that as part of the routine testing, they performed a serum osmolality as a measure of undissolved solutes in the blood. The normal constitutes of osmolality are the electrolytes glucose and urea. You have a formula to accurately calculate this. When the formula doesn't match what they collect, then they know that the difference is caused by some other variable, that a low molecular weight drug must be found to be the culprit. Ethanol alcohol is one of these constitutes. So since Joe's blood did not match what the formula found, then they knew that the blood alcohol content was in fact correct, and that he was drunk, that the test was not flawed, and that in vivo fermentation or in vitro fermentation could not have been the cause for the blood test to come back like that. In vitro fermentation is similar to in vivo fermentation, but in vitro fermentation occurs in the vial after the sample has been collected. After the sample has been collected, if it's left in warm temperature and allowed enough time to fermentate, then ethanol can be produced, and that can change the blood test information. But Wu assured that that could not have happened in this case. And even if it had happened, in the case that it has happened in, the change in ethanol is very slight. Based on this testimony and the bevy of evidence against him, Joel was sentenced to 15 years, for which he did 10 years before being released on parole. He never drank again, and after his release, he returned to the church where the priest was waiting. He took him in and never asked him about the circumstances of that night and the drinking that occurred the night that Teddy died. I found this story very interesting. At first, when the public defender brought up the issue of in vivo fermentation, I thought that it was going to be applicable to Joe's case, and maybe he wasn't drunk, and that there was another reason why, to explain what had happened. But then as I kept reading, I soon learned that no, that was not the case, that it was just a sneaky ploy by a lawyer to try to get his client off. This story, brings up a interesting topic of, in vivo fermentation, in vitro fermentation. I was looking forward to, seeing, is that really possible? Could that explain? Is that really applicable? Could that be the cause of something like this? But unsurprisingly, the answer turned out to be no. It was just a sneaky ploy by a lawyer. This story really nails home the idea that lawyers will try to manipulate facts any which way they can to benefit their own client, that they're not really out there trying to find the truth, that they'll manipulate and change truth to fit their needs. That whole concept of, alternate truth and falsehoods, is really interesting, especially now, the whole issue of Trump and his press secretary. The whole concept of truth and what is true is really interesting. Anyway, I found this story really interesting. In vivo fermentation sounds, for a second, at least I thought it might be something interesting and applicable, but turns out no, that is pretty minor, and that blood tests are pretty accurate.